Hi, my name is Jack Archer, and I'm going to read you an excerpt out of my new novel, Florida is Gone. Chapter 1, Ryan Frey, Oh Pardon Me. There were many ways to die. The Sunshine State was known for many things. Its oranges, golf courses, old people, Disney World. It was less known for how good it maintained those things, the constant pumping of groundwater, leaving the porous limestone shelf Florida sat so precariously on to crumble away and swallow houses whole. Ryan Frey never worried about dying much before now, but the pictures of the 2,000-foot, perfectly round sinkhole in China haunted his dreams. When he was a kid, he'd pass by Lake Rose every day on his way to school, knowing how many houses it had swallowed. The earth suddenly opening up beneath him into a great Stygian abyss was the only thing to ever make his skin clammy. Now he stood at the edge of the biggest sinkhole he had ever seen. The lake next to him had turned into a waterfall and splashed down into the limestone mesas below. It made the expanse of darkness in front of him infinitely more daunting. Ryan shuddered and steeled himself to walk around the rim of the sinkhole and focused on the fast food place inches within his grasp. He tried hard to not glance back at his greatest nightmare, but he did it anyway as he approached the front door. There were better ways he could die. The door squeaked open and Ryan winced, hoping he didn't advertise his position. When he heard nothing, he shut the door behind him, looking around the dirty floor and abandoned counters. While the people were few, Ryan had yet to see a police car, ambulance, the National Guard, a fire truck, a goddamn golf cart with a police light on it to mark the world's passing. The sickly stench of rotten food hit him, and he pulled a bandana over his nose and mouth, closing his eyes as if that would get rid of it. Food was still strewn across the countertops, forgotten in everyone's haste to evacuate. He hit the fridge with the heel of his hand inside. Every single place he'd visited stood empty. Was everyone gone? The office was no better. A body lay slumped against the back wall, bloody and decayed. The hole in its head made Ryan's stomach flip. Desperate to get away from the stench, he flew through the back door and into the harsh sunlight, spotting a huge delivery truck with the lock undone. The latch stuck tenaciously, but the wave of decaying food threw him back. When his legs supported him again, he noticed the cases of water stacked up along the truck's walls. He must have wasted a bunch of daylight, but Ryan roughly moved 50 cases of water to the front of the store and rummaged around the truck's front for a Sharpie and a piece of paper. He scribbled on it and stuck it to the pallets of water. His crude sign read, "Godspeed, y'all," and he needed the pick-me-up as much as whatever other unlucky souls who came wandering in search of shelter, water, hope. Fitting several bottles in his backpack, he set off east again down Highway 414 into the heart of Florida. On the morning of December 21st, 2012, a wave threw Florida into darkness. Its streets and cities crumbled, the caverns beneath it ultimately giving way. With no way to check on his friends or the rest of the world, Ryan packed a small number of things and entered a scene of chaos. The deeper he ventured into central Florida, the more hideous sinkholes cropped up in the middle of streets, neighborhoods, and cities. They weren't too picky. Every so often, he felt the ground shuddering beneath his feet as he walked, heard the distant groans getting closer. Time was a mystery these days, since Ryan did not know how to survive outdoors longer than 10 minutes, but when the sun sank low in the sky, he saw two figures milling about up the road. He stopped to hold up a hand and wave. A gunshot pinged off the car next to him. His body instinctively threw him behind a truck and pulled out a worn machete. He felt ridiculous holding it now, but it was the only thing close to a weapon he had found in his apartment. Silence burned into his ears for a few moments as his breathing caught up to him and his mind reeled. Footsteps approached, and Ryan slid around the truck as a middle-aged man slowed his pace and passed by his hiding spot. When his back faced him, Ryan emerged and stood slowly, machete drawn. It was evident the man had no intention of talking things out with Ryan, as he brought a worn gun up with the intention of shooting him directly in the face. In a single motion, Ryan swung the blade, catching him by the throat and slapping the gun from his hand. The gun clattered to the ground as the man's hands flew to the macabre river now flowing from his neck. Ryan let his machete fall, and he knelt down next to him, holding his hands out as if his regretful gesture would fix it. More footfalls reached his ears as light left the man's eyes. A woman rushed to where the man lay, and she covered her mouth, eyes growing wide. She found Ryan and pulled a knife as a howl tore from her throat. She lunged at him, and Ryan dodged clumsily, losing his balance and falling to the asphalt next to the dead man's gun. The woman regained her balance and spun around, poising the knife to plunge it into Ryan's chest, but Ryan was quicker as he grabbed the gun and aimed. 1, 2 shots, and the woman jerked as bullets ripped through her chest and neck. The knife fell from her hand, and she crumpled, the front of her shirt growing red. The two people lay there motionless, bleeding, and making Ryan's gut heavy. He stood up and leaned against a car, wiping sweat from his forehead. The cicadas chirped at him from the trees, and he blinked sweat from his eyes. He turned and puked. Head between his knees, he attempted to cry but couldn't, finding only a dullness around the edges of his thoughts and an odd lack of emotion. He stood up straight and turned around, forcing himself to stare at the bodies. Several uncomfortable moments passed before he could move again. They were both wearing knapsacks, and he went to remove them. More blood poured from the man as Ryan turned him over, and he stopped to puke again. He opened the worn knapsack and brought out a bottle of beer and a pack of beef jerky. Nothing worth killing someone over. He performed the same process with the woman, puking and all, opening her pack and pulling out a photo album. He didn't search further. Dragging the body wasn't as easy as he thought it would be. Sweat dripped down the back of his neck as he got a hold around the man's ankles and slid him foot by foot down the hill. The woman was a bit easier to move, but not by much. Ryan lifted the collar of his shirt up to wipe his face and heaved up the hill again to search for something to cover the bodies with. The first car held nothing, the second was bare, but the third contained what he wanted. He carried the large blanket now folded up under his arm, and he stuttered down the hill again to the bodies. It whipped through the air and draped itself over the figures, their shapes bulging from the flowery pattern. Nothing flitted through his mind, and he frowned at his insensitive lack of emotion. No use dwelling on it. He retrieved his backpack from the top of the hill and eyed the gun with fear. He would not be killing anyone again. Looking up the road, he assumed the people came from the gas station he saw earlier. He limped his way towards it. Hopefully he would not regret his decision. As he approached, the end of a fire at the pumps waved to him, and a broken window near the ice machine marred an otherwise good-looking storefront. His eyes swept the space until he saw a body sitting near the door. Ryan crept across the pavement, avoiding the various refuse. When he reached the man, Ryan bent down and put a finger to his throat and found a pulse, his own quickening. He looked younger, mid-20s like Ryan, but there were dark circles under his eyes, and his black cropped hair desperately needed a trim. "Hey, buddy, wake up." His voice poured out of him like a truck full of rocks, and Ryan coughed, but the man did not stir. "Come on, just..." He continued shaking for a moment before stopping and sitting back on his heels. The sun dipped below the trees fast, and he debated for a moment. He couldn't leave the guy out here to his own devices. He might seriously be hurt. Ryan scratched his too long beard and tapped his chin. Decisions. Ryan shuffled backwards through the door, dragging the man into the store by his armpits and setting him up against the soda machine, then rushed to pile whatever he could find in front of the door. He turned around, unsurprised at the gun in his face. Ryan raised his hand slowly to suggest he was not a threat while trying to ignore the heat the man's eyes burned into him. They made a dramatic tableau for a moment until the man dropped his arm and wrapped his hands around his leg. "Since you haven't killed me yet," he grumbled. "Hi." Pleasantries aside, Ryan moved to the man's side, assessing the long, ragged wound beneath shreds of denim, which his newfound friend tore apart. "Do you want some help?" Ryan took his backpack off and held it for a moment while the man fixed him with a dubious look. Finally, he nodded, taking his own backpack off and shoving it to the side. Ryan dug through his bag and brought out a few pieces of gauze and medical tape and sat down next to the man. He helped rip some of the denim from around the wound and studied it for a moment. A gash stretched from the top of his thigh to the side of it, shallow but bloody. "What happened?" Ryan asked, pouring peroxide on the wound and dabbing it away with a cloth. "A couple of folks out there I thought were trying to help." His patient sucked his teeth at the peroxide and looked away. "Shot at me and got distracted by something." "That may have been my fault," Ryan muttered, and tore a bandage open with his teeth while he kept the cloth pressed on the wound. "Whatever you did, I appreciate it." The man hung his head and chuckled as he lifted up his leg to allow Ryan to wind gauze around his thigh. Ryan finished his patching and sat back to admire his work. His eyes shifted to the man's now outstretched hand, and he took it. "Joseph Alexander Tran," he introduced, and shook firmly. "You can call me Joey." "Ryan Frey." As they sat in silence for a moment, recuperating from the blistering sun outside. "You a nurse?" Joey arranged himself in a more comfortable position against the case behind him and reached for his water. "Call center admin." Ryan smiled wryly. "You should think about switching jobs," Joey laughed. "The end of the world is a hell of a resume builder." Joey obviously hadn't laughed this way for a long time. He sounded stiff and out of practice. Ryan smiled softly and he tapped at a chip case with a foot. You know, last week I was wearing an ugly Christmas sweater at a company party, Ryan blurted out, thrilled he had someone to talk to. Yeah? Joey pushed. Me and a couple friends from the floor hung out at a table the whole time. Ryan squinted at the fading sunlight, another day gone. How many more did he have? It's one of those fancy parties the higher-ups put on to show you how good you could have it if you worked hard enough and put your mind to it. Joey chuckled and nodded solemnly. What about you? Ryan asked. Any fancy holiday parties? I think we had one at our office, Joey mused. I didn't go. Not a party guy? No, Joey played with the top of his water bottle. Stayed home. Didn't do anything. He frowned at his drink. I don't think any of us got in what we wanted, man. Ryan looked down at his nails and frowned, his tone more pronounced. You included? Joey pressed. It wasn't my dream to answer phone calls for 8 hours a day. Not one of those live for the moment kind of guys? Ryan scoffed. As for white girls with Pinterest accounts, he said, flicking the tab off his drink and watching it sail into the darkness. He pulled out a small lantern from his pack and set it up as the last of the light faded from the store. I had bills to pay. Sure, I would have loved to pack up my stuff and book it to another country, but it's not like I had a rich husband to help me on the plane or let me stay in his house while I found a job. Did you have your dream job? I designed software. Joey frowned and tapped a finger on the floor. I wanted to make games. And I did during my free time, but there's a lot more that goes into game creation than I thought. I guess I could have moved to a bigger city. But I was comfortable. He shifted nervously. I had a stable paycheck. I felt like it'd be a stupid move to risk it all for something I might end up hating. Ryan looked up at Joey and sighed. He tilted his head, smiled, and tapped Joey's foot with his own and snapped them out of it. Where were you headed anyway? Ryan asked. The Keys, Joey replied. This route? I had a friend out here. Did you find him? Ryan asked. Found a big-ass hole where his neighborhood used to be. Was he that bad? Ryan's brow furrowed. Was he? Joey started, then laughed. No, I meant like a big hole. Like a sinkhole, not a big asshole. Ryan snorted. He was so caught up in a world where they were the last people on Earth talking about their lost dreams in the lantern's light that he had completely forgotten about the sinkholes erupting everywhere. Most of Florida was prone to sinkholes, but Ryan wondered about the rest of the state. You still want to go to the Keys? Ryan raised an eyebrow at him. They're not really known for their sinkholes. Are they not? Joey asked incredulously. Gee, have you ever been to the Keys? Ryan asked as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Well, have you? Laughed Joey. Once, came Ryan's reply. But an old man tried to sell me a palmetto hat for $5, and I left promptly. I don't know. Joey scratched his eyebrow with a finger and gave him a lopsided grin. I think I'd look good in a palmetto hat drinking some fine rum by the seaside. Hey. Ryan looked up at the ceiling and twiddled his thumbs, pausing before he went on. You want to tag along with me for a while? Christ, when were the wedding invitations going out? It's probably a good idea, Joey said after a moment, looking up at him. We'll see if you still want to book it south once you've seen the finer things Orlando has to offer. Joey snorted again. Let's get some sleep. Ryan tried wrestling around between the two shelves and pulled his pack under his head as a makeshift pillow. We can wake up and run downstairs to see what Santa brought us. It'll be better in the morning. He flicked the lantern light out and grumbled a good night to Joey, fidgeting to get his faux pillows right on the hard concrete floor. After 4 days of silence, it elated Ryan to have someone to talk to and wanted nothing more than to wake his new friend up and talk through the night like kids at a slumber party. After half an hour, soft snoring came from Joey, and the sound of it lulled him to sleep. Thanks for listening.